So, you know what, I'll start as if we didn't do introductions, if you'll just bear with me for 1 second. So we're adaptED consultants, we're neuroscientists, and we have basically committed our business adaptED to bringing neuroscience into the workplace and the educational space. Our first 3 years were primarily education, so our hookup with LAX Chamber was originally through the education subcommittee. Now we have gone more into the corporate environment, to the nonprofit world, and so we're broadening our target audience, and so that's what we're trying to do here with the Lunch and Learn. So we've been doing that other places as well and getting more clients. So, but today the primary focus is going to be, because our whole mission is like we think we can solve the world through neuroscience. I swear we both believe that. And so all the world's problems. And so today it's going to be sort of for you guys as individuals, in charge of your business, as leaders in your communities, etc., as problem solvers, is trying to help you make the most of all that potential that you have, because we can become very distracted, and our world is very distracting, both emotionally and otherwise, right? And so how do we take advantage of what we know about our biology to just be present when we need to be present, and to stay focused, and to also honor that our brain needs some brain breaks, and so we'll kind of talk about what that looks like.
Okay.
So to get started, I do want to go right into an activity, a demonstration. So I'd like one volunteer, and it's going to be totally worth it. Okay. All right. So this is going to be our space right here, and if you guys can just orient yourself so you can see it. And what I'm going to ask you to do, can you remind me of your name? Sheila. You said it, Sheila. Okay, Sheila, I'm Kelly. I'm going to have you throw targets at this, beanbags at this target. So, is it there?
No, I'm going to stand there, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to do that.
You're going to do underhanded tossing at the target. And so just stay where you are. Don't move as you continue to get better at it.
Or better at it.
No, this part is super easy. It will get challenging though. Be
Okay.
warned.
I go for that dot, right?
Yeah. You're gonna shoot right at the target.
All right. All right. Don't
Use
look.
your dominant hand and underhanded, please.
Like that.
Yeah. All right. Excellent.
Huh.
Excellent.
Can I
Pretty
move?
straightforward. Please don't. I prefer that
okay.
you just
Right.
hang out right where you are. Yeah. Yeah, I probably gave you too many all at one time.
All right.
But see, it's very easy, right? I mean, you guys could do this no problem.
Yes.
Even if you haven't, pitched
Ooh,
for
yeah.
softball.
Yeah. Anybody can do this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So good. Now we're convinced you've got it, and I'm going to make it more challenging. Okay. So I'm going to. Do I have permission to put goggles on you?
Goggles, yeah.
Okay. No. Keep those.
Oh, keep these on?
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to put these goggles on with your permission. See if you can get yourself right where you were. Are you in the same
Oh,
spot?
I'm in the same spot.
Okay. I'm going to put these on, and then we're going to ask you to do the same thing. No changes.
Okay.
Okay. So try and hit the target with the beanbags.
Oh boy, this is like, whoa. It's got colors now. Judy in the sky. Special goggles. All right.
That's the first time anyone's done that.
Woo! Wow!
All right, so you guys all see what's happening, right? Okay.
It's not there, even though it looks there, right?
But I don't see what's.
What does she see?
Yeah. So we'll pass. We'll pass.
Colors.
These
don't
It's a child in the 60s, right?
Yeah, I can tell. Okay. Let's see.
So she's way off to the left, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
so go like this.
Okay. So
And
you
then go
do,
like that.
you do what you think you need to do.
Oh man,
And the
I need
goal
to take off
is-
the goggles.
Right, well,
it's not gonna work, right?
That's not an option we're going to give you right now.
Yeah.
But you're going to continue to get better, right?
All right.
So, and each time you throw, pay attention to what you're doing, so that if
Yes.
if it works, you can do it again.
Okay, that didn't work. So let's do this.
Okay, so that was
better.
way better.
That's
So
better.
whatever you did, try to replicate.
Okay.
The concentration
I
is
know.
very
Can I give you a few more?
significant.
Okay.
Okay, so she's adjusting her strategy, right? She is changing her physical stance. She's changing the aim, I guess. Is there something you're shooting for in particular?
Yeah, that little ball there. You know, the little circle there.
Oh, you mean you're still, right, got
I'm
it.
still
Yep,
looking at
okay,
that. That's,
okay,
That's all of them.
okay. Okay.
Almost.
Really?
So what you're doing with your arm is really helpful, and I would like to suggest that you also pick a different target.
Oh. On that target, pick a different target.
Actually, you can
No?
go farther than the target.
Oh,
So pick something to the right of the target
okay.
and just try and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah,
I've been on this rodeo
okay.
once or twice before.
Well, How'd you work that time?
So pick something like that will stay still, so not me, but something to the right of the target. There you go. Okay, so continue to do that because we're actually, believe it or not, we're gonna have you do it 3 times in a row. Hit the target 3 times in a row. And it's totally possible. Girl, don't do it too fast.
Okay.
No, you should continue to be successful.
Okay.
Okay, good. That would have hit it.
Yeah, it's a little bit more power.
Yeah, more power.
And when we have big, spaces full of lots of people,
Yeah.
we always get them to like support, like, yes, Sheila, you got
Yeah.
it.
Oh, girl, I'm ziplining. Oh, that was real good.
Reverted back.
Sometimes I'm just gonna continue to talk, so just don't
Oh,
mind me.
and I just continue to hit, right?
Yeah.
Yes, please, because we want you to get it 3 times in a row.
There you
Ooh,
go. All right.
So sometimes we've had people like use all kinds of funky strategies, and one time we had a guy who only relied on his support system, meaning the people around who were
Call it
guiding
a
him.
lifeline?
A little bit to the right, okay? A little bit to the right, a little bit to the right, a little bit up, a little bit. So when we tried to do our punchline, which
Right,
we're
so a
about
little
to
bit
do
to
in
the
a
right.
minute, it didn't work
Oh.
because he had his eyes closed the whole time.
Oh,
Was
no.
doing what she's doing with his eyes closed.
Hey,
And got
so
it
he was
3 times in a
literally-
row.
What?
Yeah, it was crazy. But you'll see afterwards why that matters. Okay, so she's gonna do a little bit more. I forget where we are. I'm not paying
Third time, I
attention.
think, right?
It's, let's do 2 more where we,
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Throw those last 3 just because I got them in your hand.
All right. Well, that's fun. Power, power, power.
Good, no, that's great. I like your self-talk. Okay, don't take them off, okay? So stay right there. So we're gonna give you the beanbags one last time, and I'm gonna have you do this again, except I'm gonna have you do it the second I remove the goggles. Right, so as soon as I take them off, you just go ahead and right away, don't think about it.
All right.
Don't take time to like ruminate, okay? Ready?
All right, just
And
go.
Okay, do it again. Okay, do you guys see what's happening? Do it again, keep going.
Yeah.
So now she's doing what? Keep going.
Now she's
throwing them to the right,
Way off to
and
the
now
right,
she's
right?
adjusted.
And she's kind of coming back, but still having a hard time, still trying to adjust a little bit. Let's do a little more because you are driving, I take it.
Reset your brain.
Gotta get you back straight. And see, she's still a little bit off
I
to
want
the
that
right.
right.
There we go.
There's the middle.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
And how does it feel?
Hey,
Do you feel normal?
I think I hit it.
That was normal. That looks really good.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Okay.
easier now to
You
do
look
it.
good.
Yeah.
It's easier now than the first time?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, and so that's probably because you now have a sense of how far it has to go.
Right.
Great, you can have a seat, thank you. Awesome. Okay,
Thank you, that was fun.
and yeah, we can pass those around.
Yeah.
They are called fatal vision because they are actually meant to teach adolescents what it looks like to drive inebriated. So they skew your vision 30 degrees to the left, but kill 2 birds with 1 stone, talk about drunk driving and plasticity all at the same time. So tell us how that felt.
Yeah, it felt like drugs, I guess.
Wait, why do you know what the
I was gonna say, I don't wanna say that. I imagine.
Not in front of me.
I imagine that's what it is, okay? I imagine that's what it must
Reach for
feel like
something.
to be drunk and driving, because.
Weird, right?
The,
Those are horrible.
Daryl.
Well, I mean, but
The
I don't know
colors.
if you guys noticed, but as soon as she put them on, she was like, even holding the bean bags, you could see was a little bit
different.
as if it was less able. Do you know what I mean?
So the
Okay.
brain has to rearrange.
Yes. So basically, you've lived on this planet for decades, right?
Too many.
So, but think about it in terms of all of your practice. 100% of your experience on this planet has been with things that you expect to be in front of you being in front of you. Okay. And so
Yeah.
you put on these goggles. It's literally 30 degrees. And yet, how many minutes did it take for you to be able to do the task assigned?
Yeah.
7? I don't know, 5 even.
Yeah.
Not that many
Not that many.
minutes, right? So that's pretty incredible that within 5 minutes you were able to just counteract, however many years of experience and function adaptively and functionally in this environment, right? And then when you took them off, what happened when you took them off?
I had to readjust.
Yeah, so you had,
It was like, oh, that's where it is now.
what was going on with the goggles on? What was your brain doing?
I hope I'm hitting this right.
Yeah.
So I kept telling so that I don't look, I hope I'm getting close to the target. That's all I was thinking, and it was like.
What's the action it's taking? What's
Hit.
What's it called when you're getting better at something with practice?
Confidence.
Practice.
And learning, right? So
Learning,
it was learning.
Thank
It
you.
was learning to function with this new set of input, which is skewed, right? If you'd worn them for 3 weeks, what would have happened?
Oh, that would have been interesting.
And she would never be allowed to drive.
Yeah. I feel like we're going driving.
She'd probably be a disaster for a couple of days, and then her brain would rewire, and then
There you
it
go.
would look normal.
That's right.
Everything would be
Yeah.
very colorful.
And these experiments have been done in humans recently, and for about a week, people are a disaster, and then they adjust, and they can actually go between the two worlds fairly efficiently, meaning you could take them off and put them on, and they.
Oh, wow.
So what was that world I
Send me
was in?
the study. What are you talking about?
It's recent. I'll share it with you.
So what was that world I was in with that, with the glasses? Is there a
The
world?
drunk world.
Just 30 degrees skewed. That's all.
30 degrees
It's just your
skewed.
brain trying to make sense of something that's never experienced before.
Oh.
Yeah.
Actually, that experiment too is with shifting the world completely. So
Oh.
that left is right and right is left.
Oh
So
my
slightly different
God.
glasses. So.
That sounds terrible.
And they take a video, on the website there's a video of somebody making brownies after just putting them on. And they're, all the things that we take for granted, like reaching for an egg and they're missing and it's a huge mess and then the brownies come out
That
and of
sounds
course
horrible.
Yeah. So anyway.
Why would they do
so it
this
was like,
study? I mean, the participants, the people conducting the study, that's brilliant. It's intriguing, but I don't know why anybody would volunteer for that.
Because we want to understand how profoundly plastic the brain is, which is essentially what this is all about, right? Is that we need to, and the studies are just endless. We just have such a profound understanding now of how plastic the brain is, right? The example I always talk about in terms of this acute setting where you're just in the moment, you're able to adapt, is like when we think there's a step and then there's no step, but we don't fall, right? So the fact that we're able to just stumble and not fall most of the time at this age is really important because we don't fall and crack our head open and die and then we can't pass on our genetic material, right? And that means that we are necessarily descended from the versions of us that were adaptable in that moment, right? Because otherwise, that version of us died and didn't pass on its genetic material because it couldn't adjust to a changing terrain, right? So we're acutely plastic, meaning we have to be able to adjust to changing environmental conditions, but also we are long-term plastic, chronically plastic in the long term. That's what learning is. That's what memory is. But how does it take place? It takes place via these, that was my daughter wearing the goggles, via these cells that are called, anyone know what the brain cells are called? Oh, I shouldn't touch it. Do you guys know this anatomy? The brain cell is called a neuron.
No.
Yeah, I've heard it.
That I do. I
Read
just
that in
don't
psychology.
recognize that that's what they look like.
That is what they look like, except they're not purple and red and you know what I mean? And they're super microscopic, there's 100 billion of them, each one of them can make up to 10,000 connections, and they make 10,000 connections via these dendrites. These are little projections. I like to have people really think about the cool shape that they are, because when you think of cells, you think of circles or
That's definitely
flat
much cooler. It's like
things,
snowflake.
right? And so exactly, it's like a snowflake. And so it's like a snowflake because it's got to make connections, and those connections that's the crux of where the learning takes place. Is because if you had worn them for 3 weeks, let me put it this way. If you had to choose between the two pairs of neurons, which one would reflect you after 3 weeks of wearing the goggles?
Probably that one.
On the right? So you get from here to here with practice, learning, effort, repetition, right?
It kind of happens with glasses when you put different things on them, like different, like I have I don't know how many bifocals and all that. Is that kind of the same thing with the brain?
yeah. You'd be adapting to the world looking differently and then having to adjust that, with these glasses on, this distance is here and this one is here, right?
And this is also important to think about because if the brain made long-term connections like these material ones, the ones that you can touch and measure and quantify in science, for every single change in your environment, that would be problematic, right? Like if every time you tripped over a stump, your brain rewired to incorporate a stump into your environment, that would be a problem. So you have to have both the short term and the long, they both have to be there, right? Because you have to be able to come back, which you were able to do. After you took the goggles off, you could return to normal, right? Okay. I don't want to spend too much more time on plasticity because we want to get to this part about being able to focus in our lives and stay present and talk about attentional networks. So I actually am going to kind of cut off because we're already at 25 or 20. So, but typically when we go through this, we really drive home that we have so much evidence in human beings, in rats, in other animals, and this is about cab drivers in London, and we'll talk about areas of the brain that actually show measurable change from learning, that you can quantify volume, tissue grows and stuff. It's not really responding to me, but
So it grows as in like it gets bigger?
gets bigger. You can measure it. So this study, one time I'll come back and I'll tell you guys, you get a bigger hippocampus and you can actually measure it, right? It's really cool. And that's because the hippocampus is so involved in memory. And so you would see things like this if you were to look in the microscope and actually draw a picture of what the neurons look like after the learning, right? In this case, it's about rats. But it's the same phenomenon because we don't dive into human brains and actually count their neurons. All right, but we see it in jugglers, in students studying for the boards, in musicians. This is a really well-known phenomenon. You may have seen lots of popular science articles about musicians showing really profound changes in the brain as a result of practice. So it's just that the brain, when it's learning, that is a material thing that we can measure and quantify. It's not just an idea. Learning and memory is something that we can actually measure. Okay? All right, so I'm going to have Anne-Marie talk about attention a little bit, and then we'll get to the meat of it.
All right, so she gave you a review of plasticity. I'm going to move up to one of these higher properties of the brain, which is what we call attention. So what does attention mean to you guys?
Focus.
Focus, right? And in general, when you think of attention, you think of it as focusing which way?
Being present.
On something.
On something, outward, yeah, that's where it's going. And so it turns out in the last 10 to 15 years, neuroscientists have found that there are two attentional networks. The one that all of us sort of recognize as attention being outward, which is what hopefully is going on right now as you listen to me speak. But there's also an internal network that I'm going to get to later, and that worksheet we're going to work through is going to help you understand how to optimize the use of both networks, okay? So let's start. So attention is actually directed or run by this small group of cells that are, in most people, on the left side of the prefrontal cortex that we write about here. And they're not actually called director cells in the literature, that's just what we call them because they're interesting. So it's interesting and easy to remember. And these are, in order to really show you how they work, let me take you through attention in like a Psych 101 or even Neuroscience 101 way. So attention really is run by the front of the brain, and if I were to start measuring your attention, I could basically measure what's going on in the brain and put some things for you to look at in front of your face as a screen, right? And so if you were in the lab and I showed you these two ovals, scientists would then see some representation of these two ovals in the visual cortex of the brain. So this is the area at the back of the brain that's involved in vision. And so, of course, it's not going to look like that. You know, you wouldn't be able, scientist doesn't peer in and see two ovals in the back of there, right?
There's just some
So,
sort of reaction or
there's a representation of these two ovals.
Activity, like neurons
Oh,
firing.
Right, back there. So now what if I told you to focus on the red, this is super slow, I'm sorry. Focus on the red oval. Alright, so I'm not changing anything about this. I'm telling your director cells, hey, pay attention to the red oval. So the director cells are where we direct attention. What do you think happens in the brain? As far as the representation.
I guess that
bigger.
that activity
Yeah.
would be more.
Yes, more neurons fire or fire at a higher frequency. So this is really mind-blowing and almost philosophical in a way because when I learned this in graduate school, I thought it was the coolest thing ever because nothing has changed about the actual stimulus right?
It's
The
just
only,
we've changed the way we look at it.
We're
yes,
paying attention to
which
it.
is really phenomenal,
The
right?
way we perceive it.
Yeah.
Ah.
And so there's a couple of things to notice. One is what happens to the green one.
It's
It
still there.
diminishes. It
It
diminishes.
diminishes, it's smaller. So what does that suggest? If one thing gets bigger, one thing gets smaller. Attentional resources are
Limited.
limited, finite, yeah, is the word that we often use. And so this is actually a good thing though too. So focusing and filtering is what the director cells do. And a good way it could be a good thing is that when you are focusing on writing an email in a workspace that you have a loud coworker, it's good that you can, that one of them's getting bigger and another one's getting smaller. So this is how this would roll out into the actual world, right? We don't spend our days paying attention to ovals. So we often discuss attentional control as a very limited flash drive. Right, so outward attentional control has very limited capabilities. This is one of the downsides or bugs, not features of our attention. And what that means is that we have only so many files we can have in our attentional control files, kind of my metaphor for ideas or thoughts or anything that is in your attention. And so I just put this up here as an example of what might be in any moment in any of our attentional flash drive. And this is obviously arbitrary, we don't just have 9, but it's limited. So what might happen, do you think, if I was given something new and I had my attentional flash drive totally full?
Something's gonna drop.
Yeah, either it's not going to make it in there or something's going to fall off.
That's what happens to me.
That's life every day.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about some ways around that. So, and for most of us who have jobs that we really need a high level of focus, or we're manipulating and combining a lot of factors and a lot of ideas when we're working, some of them that aren't necessarily memorized or wrote, you need all of this, right? You really need all of your attentional control if you're doing deep, concentrated, heavy, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, complex work, right? So what do you actually want your, you know what, I'm skipping it. Sorry, I had this slide rearranged, so I was expecting a different one. Let me get into it a little bit more, how these director cells work. So this is one way we can work with humans' neurons. We can give them these fancy caps, and these are all electrodes here. And each electrode here probably represents some kind of trace here, so they're measuring electrical activity of groups of neurons, because you're not actually able to get into a single neuron.
What are the ones on her eyes? Is that just tracking what she's looking at?
That's actually looking at emotional response to something, because if you smile, you get
micro expression.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know what this exact study was. Just an example of the hardware we use and ways we can measure it. So what you'll see, and we know when you're paying attention, because when the director cells engage, you get all these little lines to become synchronized. So this is actually how attentional control works, is that once, and this is actually the way a lot of those mind game toys work, that like you focus and the ears go up. A lot of those are based on this very simple principle of being able to measure what you're paying attention to and what you're engaged in. When the director cells turn on, these what look like, they're not synchronous at all, we'll start to see synchronous patterns. And so we can put this on you and we can do some experiments. We're going to do one here. I'm going to have you look at this just for a second. And I'm going to have you tell me which one is here.
That one.
On the right. Okay. Yes, I believe that's right. I couldn't remember either. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on you guys.
Right.
Okay, let's do it
Yeah.
one more time. Okay. I'm going to give you this.
Okay.
And then I'm going to have you tell your neighbor a joke. I'm going to start with one, which is there's 2 muffins in an oven, and one muffin says to the other muffin, "Boy, it's hot in here." The other muffin says, "Holy crap, a talking muffin." Now tell one to your neighbor.
I can't. Oh, if you get attacked by a group of clowns, what do?
Laugh.
You go for the juggler.
Okay. The juggler.
I like it.
Who else has a corny joke? They must be corny. I feel like this now has to happen.
Thanks, Howard.
Oh no.
You
No
got
other
it?
jokes?
All right.
Oh wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bunch of boring people.
How did the boy tell?
Oh, yeah, she has one. Sorry.
Yeah.
How did the boy tell that time flies?
Yeah, and I know some of your friends work on
I don't know.
He threw the clock out the window.
Okay, so, which
Oh.
one? Which one now?
The one on
The left.
So,
okay.
how did you guys do that?
I counted squares.
Okay, so that's one strategy. But
I turned it into a picture.
so some of you might be explicitly memorizing it, but were you guys thinking about it while you were telling jokes, while you were listening to me? But still most of you knew what it was, right? Or all of you.
Just memorize the picture.
So what would have been going on in the brain during that time?
Snapshot.
A big thing would have been thinking about the joke, and a small thing would have been thinking about the picture.
Ooh, I like that. Yes, so basically their director cells were engaged the entire time, right? That's how they remembered that was coming back. Or that you guys decided that it was important, and it's on your flash drive at that moment, and you were able to recall it. So during that time, even though you're focused on the joke, you're having this director cell activity going on at the same time. So is that helping your attentional load or hurting it?
Maybe hurting it because if you really wanted to tell a joke and you couldn't remember because you're directing the other way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
Because
So-
I just remembered my joke, so.
Perhaps you were able to
You were
maybe.
freed up of that load.
There you go.
Go.
So it actually is taking up one of those areas, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. So let's just let that set in for a second. So an example would be in the morning, I have to pick up dry cleaning at 5:30, right? And I leave for work, and I have to remember to pick up dry cleaning at 5:30. When do you actually need to remember to pick up dry cleaning?
At 5.
But what's happening during the day?
You're thinking about picking up dry cleaning at the end of the day.
So is that helping your?
No.
No.
Because and just to be
taking up
really
spot.
explicit, it's because those are resources. In terms of what the brain means by taking up a spot, that's blood, that's glucose, that's oxygen, that's energy. That
Although
it cannot be spent on the work that you need it to.
And it could be helpful so that you don't forget to go to the dry cleaner if that's really important. But yeah, that'd be nice to be like, think about that at 4:45 and not all day.
So, what is this? What are you guys starting to see from this?
We think about too much stuff.
Okay, so what can we do in our lives to remember which one is next?
Sometimes it's helpful just to push it because it's
Put
not
it in your phone.
responsive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Make something else remember it for you.
And so this is what we call to automate. And so, our very modern, very technologically driven society is a huge pain in some ways, but in other ways it gives us tools, if used appropriately, to really enhance, sort of be a neural prosthetic, as we would say in the nerdy neuroscience world, to enhance what we've gotten here instead of detract from it. All right, and so this is where we're going to move into our worksheet, and I actually put this up just to show you that what we want to be able to focus on is the task at hand. If we want to be able to devote all of our cognitive resources to something that we're working on, we really have to deal with all these other things that are in our flash drive at the moment as well.
When they did the study, did they break it down between male and females? And is it true that the males really can't multitask, whereas women can in this study?
I think that's
Part
a
of
practice effect, and so there are ways that, a variety of sort of tricks that our brain can use, such as chunking, that I think that women, for good or for bad, learn to get better at early on. It's kind of what society expects of us. And so it's an interesting question. I don't think it's been
So it
addressed.
could just be because they have more practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Tons of practice at thinking about many things at once because they're the caretakers and so forth, right? So they have to be thinking of themselves as well as all the time, right? So that's a lot of practice, especially if they've had kids and or taking care of parents or whatever.
So that's where we're going to move and work on a worksheet. We're actually going to work on the first column, which is the automate column. So I want you guys to come up with some, what we call more algorithmic tasks. So what's really important in this worksheet is that we separate am I in the wrong?
Oh, no, I was just making sure it's fine.
Is that we need to separate our tasks because there are tasks that aren't good for automation, right? There are tasks that really will require what we're going to call percolation. I'm going to explain that a bit more in a minute, but more creative style tasks, all right? But right now we're going to focus on things that are kind of like plug and play, just have to happen, aren't very exciting, don't require a lot of innovation to make happen. They just have to make happen. And actually, you could be innovative in how you set these up. But and so I've put some up here just as an example of things that you could automate. Practice the deep focus. What do we need to do?
Focus on one thing at a time.
And practice it, right?
More often.
And it's
And
not
practice it.
Yeah. And it's not going to be
Commit to
easy
it.
necessarily at the beginning, but it will absolutely get better and easier because our brains are incredibly plastic at the level of the neuron and at the level of the network, which is what we're talking about when we talk about attentional control. Okay.
Deep work.
Deep work, yeah. And there's a whole big push in the world of business, and again, we can't remember the guy's last name.
No, Cal Newport.
Cal Newport.
Cal Newport, he's a deep work science guy.
So-
And he just talks about how not only is deep work more productive, we've sort of talked about why, and because the brain can just use its resources more effectively and efficiently. But also, people are happier, much happier when they can get the opportunity to work deeply. And our society is not, and it's getting worse, of course. So it's like, how do we carve that into our daily routine ourselves? And if we're in charge of our work environment, it's easier. If we're not, it's harder. So it's tricky depending on the audience.
Okay. So, inward attention. This is a really interesting development in the world of neuroscience. And it came from a whole bunch of fMRI researchers who put people in fMRI machines and would give them tasks to do. And so this is how we studied the functional properties of the brain. So, like those ovals, what happens when you focus on one, what happens when you play various video games. And in this context, they would sometimes have times when there weren't any tasks. So they would just be in the fMRI machine, and the F is for functional, watching brain imaging happening. And what they started to notice is that when there were no tasks for them to do, there was this very consistent pattern of activation in the brain. And so fMRI researchers would get on the phone with other fMRI researchers and say, hey, what's happening in the brains of your subjects when they're not doing anything? And so basically through these conversations, they figured out that there's this internal reflective network that turns on when you're not outwardly focused. Okay? And I mean, it's kind of silly that neuroscientists thought when you're not doing anything, the brain goes black, right? Because any of us who've had any human experience know that that's not what happens, right?
So we stop paying attention to things outside and we start paying attention to things inside?
Yes. So there's an internal reflective network. And so investigating this network more, we found that, well, actually, let me take it through this way. So there's the external network, that is, sorry, I'm kind of in some trouble here.
Technology just doesn't like us today, it's all right.
This external network, right, that is turned on when you're listening to what I'm doing, when you're, doing a task or a puzzle or something outward, when you're playing sports, when you're, what else am I doing? When you're driving and you don't know where you are, those kind of things.
I like the chatting kids because in an adult version, it's like cocktail party. If you think about cocktail parties, they're very distracting. You could totally get lost in the noise, right? But we manage to have a conversation most of the time with whoever we need to focus on. That is the epitome of focusing and filtering out, right? And that's the ovals, but also it's our external attentional network.
And this second internal attentional network is what turns on when we're not doing anything. So we always ask people, when do they come up with their best ideas? And we hear, you guys,
In the shower,
we're not.
times when they're by themselves and just thinking.
How about your commute?
I was just gonna say driving.
Yeah.
Exercising.
Exercising, which also can be fairly repetitive, right? If you're doing things like long distance running and things like that.
I hear from a lot of moms when they do laundry.
Totally.
When you're doing the
Totally.
mundane
Yeah, we
things.
actually
You have it in the image.
Right, and so this is the internal network, and it's the daydreaming network, but it's important for a lot of really interesting things. It's important for what we call deep cognition and processing, and what that means is most of you, I describe it when going to a conference, right? You go to a conference for 3 or 4 days, you meet a ton of people, see a ton of really exciting stuff, but after the conference, you need several days to really digest and pull out what was important and relevant for you. And that happens when you're in the internal reflective network. So without that, you may just forget most of it, right? So what is important for me? How can I integrate this into my already existing networks? That happens in the internal reflective network. There's also evidence that that is where creative insight happens, about aha moments, right? And it's also really important for the development of empathy, we believe. And so this is a little bit scary because we think of now we're so outwardly focused because of our devices, right? And there's nothing inherently wrong with the device itself. The device is an incredible tool. But when you're constantly outwardly focused on a device that's with you all the time, you may not get time in this internal reflective network. So it's affecting your creative process, it's affecting your ability to learn deeply, and it's affecting perhaps your ability to be empathetic as well. Okay? So I'm actually going to skip that one and just talk to you about, so these two networks, we describe them as networks that you flip in and out of, and the effective and efficient and well-functioning brain can use both networks robustly and can move in and out of them as needed. And if you can think of many tasks that actually involve a bit of both. So if you're writing something, there's a good amount of reflection before you write, right, and thinking about that, and then there's the motor task of actually writing. And so what we want to make sure that people understand is that both these networks have incredible, what's the word I'm looking for? Have the incredible assets that are important to being fully human, and moving between the two of them. So we want them both to activate robustly, and then moving between the two of them is also really important to be able to do that. And so we've acted like it's a toggle switch, and also just to remind you that getting sorry guys. Sometimes it's our slides, they're just really data heavy, and so they're
gotcha.
pictures, but this does seem a bit slower than usual. This will work. We don't have to go back to the slide. So the ability to activate both of these networks robustly is important, right? So what do we need to activate this one?
You need like quiet and time alone.
And without outside distractions. And how many of us have that in our lives?
I do. In the morning.
All of us are now jealous.
Yeah. How many of us think we can carve more time into our lives for that now that we understand its value? Okay. Yeah, and how about as a manager? Do you feel like your employees should be doing this?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
everybody should.
Well, just because in work, typically staring into space isn't considered productivity, right? But if you have a job that requires creative insight, this is actually
really all of them should, right?
Yeah.
This
Everything
is
should
Everybody
require
needs to write
innovation.
emails or problem solve or
Yeah.
do a presentation or.
And
do
if you're
something.
not thinking that you need to apply innovation to your work, then I feel like you're limiting the capacity of the business or the product or the whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So the second part we're going to focus on, and the other thing that there is some data to suggest is that toggle switch is oiled by something called mindfulness practice. And so the ability to control your attention is practiced in the practice of mindfulness. Meditation is sort of the more acute, intense form, but mindfulness practice can be practiced anytime. And so when you're building that muscle, we say oiling the toggle switch, you actually are probably giving you some more tools to move in and out of those two networks. So now we're moving to the percolate side, and we're going to come up with a list of tasks that are more creative or innovative, right? So for example, to develop a new system to identify sales leads, get greater customer engagement over social media. None of these have clear, cut and dry answers, right? And they're things that have to be thought about and percolated upon. So these are actually going to benefit from time spent in that internal reflective network. It's not going to be necessarily, one day I spend 2 hours and I'm going to have a big idea every time I spend 2 hours out in nature, right? That's not exactly how it works, but you're priming yourself for it to happen more frequently when you're practicing in that internal network. So
Although it does work that way a lot. Maybe you guys have this in your life, but we have a friend who does a walk on the beach as a regular part of his daily or even weekly routine and doesn't bring anything, so no phone, except a little voice recorder. And he says that he has just really come up with the most amazing ideas at that time. And the same thing is true with exercise and showering and things like that, but what we have to be very careful about, because those are already built into some of our routines, which is great, take what you have and work with it. But if you'll notice, are you listening to something in your shower? Are you listening to something while you're working out? And just wonder, is that drawing away your attention? Because for me, I realized I was listening to podcasts even in the shower. I wasn't even giving myself that time to get lost in my thoughts. So where can you build in structure that gives you time to percolate?
now that also that there's value on that, right? Because a lot of our society, modern society, has not valued that. Productivity is always about being the worker bee, getting things done, right? Moving things forward. And we're not saying that's not all good, but you can all do all those things more effectively if you're coming up with novel, innovative strategies.
This also explains why we had a running joke for a while that Chamberlain, for like a year, kept coming back into the office and having a good idea, and he would always say, last night I was sitting on the couch with a beer and then I thought of this. And
Yep.
we started saying, like, you need to spend every night sitting on the couch with a beer because you're getting these fantastic ideas.
No, but this is the case that we need to spend time not
Decompress.
decompressed, and that's also when you can activate that reflective network. One really cool thing I read recently was reevaluating our out of office message. So one thing you can add to it is something, to build social rapport, which she's going to touch on really quickly in a minute, which is, I'm leaving the office to, bond with my family, we're going to Hawaii. But the second part was to perhaps set up after that for all of those emails that come in and to tell the receivers, or the senders, to go to trash, saying, I want a fully disengaged vacation and I don't want to come back to more work. The whole point of vacation is not to make more work, right? It's not to come back and do twice as much work in those few days. And of course, there's different levels of practicality of whether you can do that or not. But, or you can have it sent to another colleague who's standing in for you. Or, so that out of office message would say something like, I'm off trying to reflect, come up with new ideas, hang out with my family, and then please email me again when I'm back on this date, right? Because everything here is going to go to trash or spam or whatever. So just things to think about if we're really valuing our time off. And
trying to build culture.
Yes.
So if you're trying to promote this idea, because it is a tough sell. Our culture is so on overdrive in terms of you measure your efficiency and productivity by being harried and frenzied and over busy. If we can start being part of building the culture change that values downtime as part of productivity, because that's what biology says, can you imagine siestas would be so much more here?
I can speak to that because I do one day a week go to big corporation over here in El Segundo and do 15, 20, 30-minute massages.
Oh,
Chair massages. And
Great.
there's a couple of people that feel
Every
guilty.
office should do 15-minute massages every day.
Well, some people feel guilty for coming in
Yes.
because they should be working.
Yes.
And but then there's the other side. You have a few people that say, this is so good because I'm tuning out. They actually literally within a few minutes fall asleep.
yeah.
And it's interesting how quickly people go out and it's they feel restored after. So yes, I do think that should be in every office.
I also think Christina Davis should be in here listening to this.
So the interesting you said too about falling asleep is that right before we fall asleep, we are in that reflective network. So sleep itself is different, but pre-sleep brain activity is reflective network. So maybe let's just spend a minute of coming up with our percolate tasks. I mean, for those of you that are business owners, you have tons of them, right, that to work on. And then let's just have a little discussion about some of the ways we can promote them. And then I'm going to hand it off to Kelly for the last 5 minutes or so.
It was much easier to fill out that list than it was the automate list.
Was it? Really? That's
a little
interesting.
scary.
But now you know why you need your downtime. You can take this to your boss and be like, I need 3 weeks of
Find a
vacation.
day off. According to science.
Yeah. Right. It also puts some value too on vacation and family time in a way that that you can tie, cynically to productivity and innovation, right? So.
Well, in Europe at one time, they used to take 2 hours to rest and to eat. I remember, I don't know how long ago that was, but
Lunch breaks.
their lunch breaks were 2 hours.
Although even now, our lunch breaks are usually at our desk or in the middle of a meeting, or we're responding to stuff on our phone.
Yeah, and this is hard to do. We've been practicing being very connected and responsive. So I remember my mom was actually texting me while I'm talking to you. I'm responding to her. So it's a hard practice to break. It's going to take some time, right? And it's going to take some practice getting into that habit. So I'm going to hand it off to Kelly to do our summary. I just said that. And so this talk often comes with another piece that we feel is closely connected to this content, but we don't have enough time for it. So she's going to give you a quick summary. take it.
And it's a good summary for this group because the chamber does networking events and stuff like that. So we wanted to just tie it into something that's already built into what the chamber is doing, all chambers do.
Chamber's already helping.
Right, absolutely. And what it is that the brain is wired to be social. So again, like it's a fundamental biological thing, right? It's not just soft and fluffy. We need to build relationships. It's about, because the point is to be productive. And so we want to talk about how can we be our best, most efficient and productive selves. And there's this piece that's about attention, but it comes back to also, we're socially wired, meaning, there's none of us that would thrive in an isolated setting. There's nothing about a human being, and most animals on the planet actually, that should be living in isolation or function. And so you're never going to thrive in that setting, and thriving applies to work as well. And the evidence that we have in neuroscience about it is in the form of mirror neurons. Have you guys heard of those mirror neurons? Do you know anything about them, Kirby?
I've heard about them, but I don't
Okay.
actually know what they do.
Okay, so they're just this population of neurons that responds to other people's actions as if we're actually performing the action ourselves, which is pretty fascinating. And they were discovered in some areas that are motor, premotor, meaning they previously were thought to be neurons that were just for our own movement, for planning and executing our own movement, right? So of my arm. And then in the lab, using primates, non-human primates, so macaque monkeys, were learning to pick up a peanut from the table, and it was for a study that it was about movement in and of itself. But to pick up the peanut and bring it to its mouth, it has to learn that action from a trainer. And so in the lab, the researcher, a human, has to demonstrate that movement. And at the same time, we have these electrodes inside the motor neuron population of the monkey. So we're actually listening to firing of the neurons, listening to activity, right? It sounds like a pop on an amplifier. And so when the neurons are firing, which should be when the monkey's moving his hand, because again, they're motor neurons, you're gonna hear pop, 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 pop. And what ended up happening is that when the monkey was watching the researcher lift the peanut and bring it to its mouth, the neurons were firing. And it was such a big deal because, first of all, it's like, okay, those motor neurons are not sticking to their job. That was a revelation. But then also because what have we told you about when neurons are active?
They're learning.
They're learning. They are firing to wire. That's what we say, neurons that fire together wire together. So when they're firing, they're actually strengthening their connections. That's plasticity at work, right?
So you can learn just by watching other people learn.
Girl, you are hired. That's what's happening, okay? So, and it's just true in every sense. It's true with physical stuff, it's true with emotional stuff, it's true with pain, it's true with joy, right? We've verified it in neuroscience that we have populations in our brain that respond to other people's experiences in all of those settings, and therefore are practicing those experiences, okay, and learning from them. And just to give you one concrete example, like athletes have always known this, they've always done mental rehearsal as part of their practice and expert mastery. And now we understand what's going on is that it's actually, you're actually using the same neurons. They're firing and they're strengthening their connections the night before the match or the performance the next day.
That's why our basketball coach always told us to do that.
Yeah, did that happen for you? Yeah, absolutely. And so the reason that we want to incorporate this into this conversation about taking advantage of work-life balance is probably tapping back into what you were talking about with guilt about massage. Right? So we have this kind of, maybe it's an American ideal, I'm not sure, but I get the sense that there's this sense of productivity as measured by being harried and frenzied and always working and never taking time off, right? But in reality, we know there's something from social we know, like, because we're healthier and happier, and networking is important for business growth and things like that. So what's going on there, right? And it's actually that what we want to do is change, as neuroscientists, we want to change the culture of promoting harriedness and frenziness and shallow focus, and start building culture towards deep focus, carving out time for percolation, and valuing social connection, because it is actually working towards productivity. Because you are learning, you are gaining new ideas, you are making new connections in the brain that you can then take advantage of when will you take advantage of those new connections?
You're internalizing.
When you're percolating later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Internalizing, yeah.
And so we talk about the value of efficient focus. It's deep. It's not up here shallow, you're thinking about 1,000 things at once. We talk about carving out the time to get into that, just like lost in your thoughts, it's not prescribed, but your epiphanies will come. And then we talk about the value of connection because it's an opportunity for learning, idea generation, etc., and creativity. All right, that's it for today, guys.
Oh, we only have 5 minutes left.
You guys just blew my mind.
Wow.
60 minutes, mind blown.
Well, this is better than I thought it was gonna be.
And I'm thinking as I watch this of like every single human being that we interact with the chamber needs to watch this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we can, you know.
I don't know how to make every single person watch this, but I feel like every single person needs to do this.
We feel the same way.
Yeah, trust me, trust us.
God. I definitely
I told you,
need to do
neuroscience is gonna save the
Yeah,
world.
you need to do a personal presentation to Christina, just lock her to a chair and make her watch this, because she needs to learn to focus. But I also like this because I watched a TED Talk a couple weeks ago that you can ask anybody in the office, and I told like every single person. And this explains the science behind it, which
Okay.
it talks about the importance of being bored. And it said that you have to be bored because when you're bored, your brain goes into something called default mode, and that's when you actually
Oh, yeah.
think. And this is what they were talking about.
Yep,
Yeah.
we just don't, the fancy term is default mode network. And we just don't use, we just try to make it a little more accessible, yeah.
This is
So this, if you go there too, you'll find the, I think I've already said it, so make it clear, but if you want to get the fillable version, so like you can download this to your computer and it's got, you can fill and do it on your,
I feel like I need to do this like every week to remind myself.
right there, yeah.
Well, I mean, the reason that would be a valuable exercise is because you'd be practicing.
Yeah.
And getting
a
good
bunch of
at
stuff.
what tasks
Yes.
can go into each column, right? So which tasks do I need to automate, spend some resources and time removing them from my attentional networks, and which ones do I need to
Yeah.
schedule my percolate time for?
It's also disheartening because almost all of my tasks are percolate, and I feel like that means I need to change my tasks or give
Right,
some
and
to
it's
somebody
hard.
else.
And, right, so is delegation the answer? Is carving out just a couple hours, like you say, hey, I only can answer emails from 8
Yeah.
to 12?
Yeah.
Or, you know, everyone has different solutions. But I have talked to some employers who will encourage their staff to just make sure that there's only a certain time of day where they're considered responsive to emails. And to start building the culture that the afternoons or whichever is best for them, whatever chunk of hours daily that's concentrated and no meeting time. You know, they're gonna turn off their phone reminders, like whatever. Yeah, setting aside daily percolation time if possible, if not weekly.
Yeah.
Would you say that meditation is percolation time?
So it depends. So if you're getting lost in your thoughts during meditation, then yes. But technically, you're not supposed to be getting lost in your thoughts. You're supposed to be controlling your
When I
focus.
meditate, I focus very hard
Yeah.
on.
You're supposed to
the
be
act of
controlling your
meditating.
focus. Yeah. And so
I hate
the
it.
meditation practice is very important because you are practicing focusing deeply. It's more the external network, but you're controlling, filtering out, and
Got
focusing
it,
on one
okay.
thing. That's an excellent I mean, we recommend mindfulness all the time.
Yeah.
It is an excellent way to practice controlling your attention. It's good for happiness, it's good for emotional regulation, it's good for executive functioning, it's good for everything because you're practicing focusing and filtering out the things that you don't need. But in that sense, because it's helping you switch between networks, because what happens in mindfulness a lot is that it trains you to catch mind wandering.
Yeah.
You become aware of it and then you come
stop
back.
it.
So that's training you to switch.
Yeah.
And that's a really important skill. So it's not practicing percolating, it's practicing controlling the toggle. That's why we use that metaphor.
That makes sense, yeah.
But the way that you practice percolating is just by carving out time that's unprescribed.
Yeah. No phones.
And
no
commit
phone.
to it.
Yeah.
Commit to it. You have to keep the phone out of the room. That's
That's
really
right.
the only way. Yeah. Or just make sure it's completely
Yeah.
disenabled or whatever. Okay.
Were there any
Thank
other
you,
questions?
Good job, ladies.
This was
Great.
fantastic.
This was fantastic.
I'm Anne-Marie Seco. I'm co-founder of adaptED Consultants, and we bring neuroscience principles into the world of education and corporate and society in general.
And I'm Kelly Kent, and I'm also a neuroscientist, and we basically think that neuroscience can save the world. And so we spent today talking about how to be better at focusing deeply, how to carve out time to give our brains some rest, which is actually really important for creativity, innovation, and productivity. And finally, how to find the value in socializing and building relationships. It's also really important for what we produce. You can reach us at www.adaptedconsultants.com.
And then
And
just
thanks, guys. We hope you had a great time.
Yay!